For those who don't know anything about visceral fat, it's belly fat that's deep inside of you. Mostly fat, mostly muscle. This guy's visceral fat is that right there. And his muscle is super clean, super pure. If you want to get rid of visceral fat, you want to do high intensity exercise and cut out carbohydrates. The real benefit to fasting, in my opinion, comes from autophagy.
One of the world's leading health and performance physician who has worked with global leaders, top athletes, and peak performers. Our guest today on the Settle or Be Better podcast is Dr. Sean, who's going to be talking to us about longevity, living disease-free, and corporate health optimization. So welcome, Dr. Sean, and over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your personal health story and your current work?
Sure. So I'm currently living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but I come from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And I had a previous career in law enforcement. So I worked as a police officer and did undercover narcotics work. And then I went to law school and even was a criminal prosecutor for a number of years before I decided to go back to school and take the sciences that I needed to be able to apply for medical school. So I'd always been interested in science and decided at a relatively late age in life, 27, to pursue medical school. And finally got into medical school at the age of 30 after I did 2 years of sciences as an attorney. And then I was able to get a scholarship through the U.S. military to attend medical school in Philadelphia at Temple University. I attended Villanova University for law school in Philadelphia. And after graduating from medical school, I trained as an emergency medicine physician. So I really was specializing in something that was completely different from what I'm doing today. But like many physicians, I didn't get an appreciation for how to live healthy myself, or really how to help my patients become healthy. I was very good at using medications, surgical procedures, and medical procedures to help people out. But as far as actual strategies to optimize and help improve the health of individuals, that's something that's really not taught in medical school. So I acquired that expertise following medical school. And really, what happened is I just got disease. I became overweight and I had numerous medical problems. I had an enlarged prostate. I couldn't urinate normally. I had erectile dysfunction. I had eczema. I had chronic sinusitis and seasonal allergies. I had a restless leg syndrome where I kicked my legs all night long, obstructive sleep apnea where I would snore all night long, and I had Barrett's esophagus, severe heartburn in my esophagus. And I met a patient who told me to cut out carbohydrates and stop eating processed foods. And all my medical problems went away, all the medical conditions that I had. And so I confronted myself with the reality that what helped me the most was knowledge that was apart from medical school. And all my training seemingly kept me trapped in this paradigm that treatment is best and disease was just part of a natural progression of life. And my experience with just that one dietary change convinced me completely otherwise. And so I had to try to find a scientific explanation for the complete reversal of all my disease through that simple lifestyle strategy. So I became a researcher and I started to study the reversal of chronic disease with a colleague, another physician, MD, PhD, named Dr. Zhang, who introduced me back in 2013 to this very interesting biomarker and target of disease inside the body called visceral fat. So we looked at, for the purposes of the National Science Foundation, uh, different innovative biomarkers to reverse chronic disease, which is humanity's biggest problem. Nothing interferes and reduces the quality of living, the productivity of humans, the productivity of employees more than chronic disease. Nothing costs more money. In the United States, the largest sector of our economy is spent not on defense, not on energy, not on food. It's simply healthcare. And 90% of it is spent on chronic disease completely unnecessarily. And so we spend more money on this problem than any other problem, and nothing kills more people than chronic disease. And very, very few people talk about it, even think about it. So I like to make that point whenever I'm on a show to get people to think about the enormity of the problem. And it's not just enormous in the United States, it's globally, and I think it's even probably more significant in India than it is in the United States. And so, what we found in studying this biomarker is that nothing improves human beings more, their health, their body, their quality of living, than eliminating visceral fat. And so I purposed from that point on to bring awareness to everybody that I can as much as possible to reverse chronic disease by promoting awareness of this dangerous fat that is the very first expression of disease in humans. When we looked at children for reversing chronic disease, we saw visceral fat beginning to form even while they were, 3 and 4 years of age in their abdomens based on diet. And so the more children were exposed to carbohydrates like pancakes and waffles and syrup and sugary cereals, the more they accumulated visceral fat. And the more rapid was the onset of chronic disease in their lifetime eventually. So it's not so much the presence of visceral fat as much as the influence. And so what we found was that you can have a large amount of visceral fat acquired in a very short period of time without too much effect on your health. And you could also similarly have a small amount of visceral fat, but it's present there for a long period of time, and it has quite an influence on you acquiring chronic disease. So it's because visceral fat secretes inflammatory molecules that have this harmful, deleterious effect over a period of time, causing disease throughout the body. And in studying 6,000 people for the National Science Foundation, every form of chronic disease present in those people either went away completely or was dramatically improved when visceral fat was eliminated. And so we've become convinced, based on our experience and our study, of the importance of humans to be aware of this and more precisely to eliminate visceral fat from their bodies to begin living a disease-free life. So that's really my big take-home point to you and your audience, that if you want to live a life free of disease and its influence, you want to start by first learning about visceral fat, finding out how much you have inside of you, targeting it, and then eliminating, but through lifestyle choices, its presence from within you.
Understood. Thank you so much for that. And it's really interesting to just listen to the background of your career and, all the different lives you've lived through the decades, because that's really amazing to know. And we're grateful that you made this shift, and today we are having this conversation as well. And, to begin with, it's quite a heavy topic when we talk about the biggest crisis humanity is facing, chronic disease, right? But let's dive right into it. And to begin with, can we first, talk in simpler terms about what is visceral fat? So how can an audience easily understand it? How can we measure it? And what are the numbers that we would want to reach for a healthy state? And when we talk about chronic diseases, what exact diseases are we talking about that are interlinked with visceral fat when we talk about chronic diseases?
Yes. So maybe what I'll do is to help explain it a little bit, I'm going to just use this diagram
Sure.
a bit here to show. So let me just raise the camera a tad so that people can maybe see it just a little bit better. So visceral fat is first where it's located is within the abdomen. And so visceral fats, pull up that screen again, is is taken in a through an MRI, best visualized through an MRI machine. You can also
Mm-hmm.
see it on a CT, but an MRI is safest because it doesn't use any radiation. And it produces a slice through the abdomen where this is the belly button, the top part of your abdomen. These are your muscles in your back. If you're laying on your back in a stretcher going through an MRI machine, it produces a sliced image like this. This would be your backbone. These are your abdominis rectus, or what we call your six pack, if you have a nice lean figure. And these are your oblique muscles. Muscles show up as dark, bone shows up as dark, and intestines show up as dark, but fat shows up as white. So one of the things you can see right away here is this person is predominantly fat. But what's interesting about them, and was my colleague, Dr. Zhang, he was a thin appearing Chinese guy. He only had a 31-inch waist. In fact, the same size waist as I had. But in his image, he's filled with visceral fat because he ate so much rice. So he consumed a lot of carbohydrates. And rice, of course, is a staple in India. Lots of people consume rice. And so they may not be aware of the dietary contribution that rice plays with regard to visceral fat. But that was, in fact, Dr. Zen's experience. And then we took the white and we painted it red, the visceral fat red, and we painted the white on the outside, which is subcutaneous fat, yellow. And there's a big difference between visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. Most people, when they look at themselves and try to interpret the amount of fat they have, they're reading subcutaneous fat. And as it turns out, subcutaneous fat is like bricks and clouds difference to visceral fat. There's a couple kinds of subcutaneous fat, and you can see a black line that it runs through this subcutaneous fat right here. It's very faint, and you can see it over here as well. That black line divides subcutaneous fat into two separate areas, two compartments. One is superficial and the other one is deep. The superficial is actually really beneficial. You want it. It actually protects you from disease and improves your health. And it also reduces your risk for fatty liver disease, heart attacks, strokes. And it does so through a molecule that it creates and secretes called adiponectin. Adiponectin. So adiponectin is very beneficial, actually helps you reduce obesity and helps you reduce this stuff in the middle. And so we find people that have superficial subcutaneous fat are healthier than people that have mostly visceral fat. So visceral fat's problem is that it secretes these inflammatory molecules like IL-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, resistin, cytokines, adipokines, these biochemical substances that go through the body and cause inflammation. So they become problematic. So to the extent that you have more of this stuff for a longer period of time, you end up secreting a lot more of this. So for those who don't know anything about visceral fat, it's belly fat that's deep inside of you. And And there are a few names that I've encountered that are helpful to be aware of. Sometimes it's called invisible obesity because it's obesity that you cannot see that's inside of you. And another term that I like is radioactive fat. So it's fat that has this inflammatory systemic effect throughout your body. It doesn't just take up space or act as an source of energy. It actually is disease causing. So radioactive fat, visceral fat, deep belly fat, invisible obesity. These are all synonymous terms for this visceral fat that you want to get rid of. And so there's some similarity between visceral fat and deep subcutaneous fat. So maybe I'll just show a picture of deep subcutaneous fat so you have a quick idea about it and its influence. So this is a better example of that line and a better example of that line here separating superficial. That's the superficial subcutaneous fat that's a little bit back here. And this is the deep subcutaneous fat. So the deep subcutaneous fat is similar to visceral fat because it causes inflammation too. Now, these are love handles. These would be the things back here in your back. And people oftentimes have these big pads of fat back there. We call them in the United States love handles that you can grab hold of, your lover with all that fat back there. But it's kind of a euphemistic term for something that's really bad because if you saw a picture of yourself with love handles, you wouldn't like them. You'd want to get rid of them. And that's because they have this huge amount of very damaging fat. And so our minds have imprinting, which are basically kind of software programs that were formed and are present within our brains that allow us to perceive things that are good and bad. And so inherently, humans think of love handles as problematic and they don't want them. And it's interesting to me that those love handles are predominantly deep subcutaneous fat. And so they always correspond to visceral fat. So what that might mean is if you want to see if you have visceral fat, you want to see if you have love handles. Everybody that has love handles has visceral fat. Now, some people may not appreciate they have love handles, but you should not feel fat back there. You should just feel bone. And so if you feel bone, if you feel anything soft in there, that means you got visceral fat as well. And so the only way to really know for sure would be to get an MRI scan. So it's helpful to kind of have an example of what is good and bad on these scans. So this is a very healthy admin because they have mostly muscles and very little visceral fat. So this is a colleague in the Army National Guard with me. And this is a guy from Bangladesh, so not too far from India. He eats a lot of rice and he's filled with visceral fat. He's mostly fat and he's the same age, but they're very different in their levels of health. And so very big muscles. And when you have a lot of fat, it shrinks your muscles. So as you age and as you get more fat, you lose both the size of your muscle and the strength of your muscle. And we can see it happening by MRI over a period of time. And it's all lifestyle and dietary driven. And so if you eat a high carbohydrate diet with a lot of carbohydrates, and particularly processed foods, breads and pasta, rice, then you're going to be filled with a lot of visceral fat. And there's also these white streaks that get deposited in the muscle. And that's called myosteatosis. And so visceral fat is related and corresponds to muscle fat. So the other thing besides having love handles when you have visceral fat is you get deposition of inflammatory fat that you can think of as ruining and spoiling and damaging and diseasing your muscles. And so I'll show you another example of how this relates to your muscles. So this guy is mostly white in his scan. He's filled with visceral fat in his skin. That's a lot of visceral fat. And the guy at the bottom is just the opposite. That he's filled with muscle. He's mostly muscle, mostly fat, mostly muscle. This guy's visceral fat is that right there. And his muscle is super clean, super pure. There's no fatty deposition in that muscle. It's sort of like tenderloin, like a cut of meat on an animal where there's no fat. This is a very, very healthy individual. And then what we see in people with a lot of visceral fat is in their muscles of their legs. So we show this individual's legs in cross section. These are his bones, his femurs within his legs. And the muscles are invaded by this inflammatory fat called myosteatosis. So this highly inflammatory fat is deposited now in the muscle tissue. But you can see by comparing to the legs below, how clean these muscles are in these legs. The absence of that fat, because there's no visceral fat in this individual. And so the other influence of visceral fat is it's depositing within your skeletal muscle besides your love handles. And this is what it looks like in a store. If you have meat, could be anything, lamb, it happens in chicken, happens in pork, it happens in anything that's fed a lot of carbohydrates in an unnatural diet. It gets this deposition of fatty infiltrates within the tissue, versus this animal that's grass-fed does not get carbohydrates, very, very healthy. And so we don't oftentimes think about it, but your health is dependent upon the health of the animal that you might be eating. And so the better the quality food is a concept people understand, but sometimes the concept that how healthy the animal is a foreign concept, and it's lost on people. So you don't want to just buy cheap meat. You want to buy meat from an animal that lived a good life, that was healthy, because it's going to be a lot less inflammatory. So let's look at legs of some different aged people. This is a 40-year-old, a 74-year-old, and you can see their age. Their muscles are fragmenting, they're atrophying, they're literally falling apart, they're becoming frail. And they're mostly fat in their legs. But look at this individual here. He is 74 years old. He eats a clean diet and he's an athlete. And so his muscles are very good. And so you want that kind of appearance. And here are a couple other clients. This client is filled with inflammatory fat because they have a lot of visceral fat. And this person here is 77 years old. They have almost no fat. These are actually reflections of light from my ceiling when I took the photograph from my laptop. I got to get them fixed. But you can see how lean his muscle actually is. He does not have those fatty streaks that this individual has. And so he's 77. And so how you live your life, what you eat, how you exercise, has such a huge role in your appearance and how you look. So here's another guy who's a disaster. They're just filled with visceral fat. And somebody has an interesting story, because when he came to see me, I showed him examples of MRI scans that were good, abdomens. People had very little visceral fat. And then I showed him scans of people that had a lot of visceral fat that were bad. And when I opened up his scan, he already knew what was good and bad. So he quickly calculated that he was in trouble. And the interesting thing was, he thought he was healthy, because he would pinch his fat on the outside and he didn't have very much. He would just feel himself, oh, I'm good. I'm not fat. I'm not a fat guy. But he saw that the point of fact was that in reality, he was mostly fat inside his body. And so the awareness was so shocking to him and so surprising that he literally passed out. He fainted, fell down, and hit the floor. And so I tell that story to let people know that's why you want to get an MRI. You don't want to get a number. If I told this guy, you have 15 pounds of fat inside of you, he would not have passed out. But when he saw that, his brain would not let him be deceived anymore. And he realized he was in deep trouble and he had to change his whole life. So this is why I advocate for people to get MRI scans and not just get like a DEXA scan that will give you a number or an ultrasound report or a bioimpedance scale that will give you a number. You want to process how much visceral fat you have in your brain by looking at it in an MRI scan. So if you're listening today and you're trying to become aware of visceral fat and you want to find out how much you have, don't try to save money and use a cheap scale. You need help. You need to be motivated. You've got to stop eating rice and other things that are going to be difficult for you. You're going to need to see the enemy inside of you by doing an MRI scan.
Absolutely. This is quite shocking to just look at these scans and, see the difference. And I'm sure that, it doesn't matter now that because we think that our body composition tells us everything about our, level of health or fitness. But truly, we need to get our scans done and educate ourselves about this. So thank you for sharing this and making it so visual, because this does give a better vision for our audience also. And, talking about dealing with this, about eliminating visceral fat, is it that we can do it the same way, using the same strategies that we do just when we are losing weight, when we are overweight, or is there something more specific that you would want us to focus on? Like, what are your top five, like, go to's when anybody is working on this and eliminating their visceral fat and keeping it off?
Yeah. So yeah, I think their different strategies will affect different fat depots. What you do to get rid of them. So if you want to get rid of visceral fat, you want to do high intensity exercise and cut out carbohydrates. High intensity exercise, cut out carbohydrates. If you eat a lot of carbohydrates and you do a lot of distance running, and you try to reduce your calories, but you eat a lot of carbs, then you'll accumulate more visceral fat. So, I can't really show this picture because I don't have permission to show this guy's picture, but um, this is a guy who I have pictures of a guy who ate a lot of carbohydrates and did distance running, and they lost weight, but they have a tummy, and they have a very inflamed face. And so, carbohydrates are very problematic for visceral fat, and distance running is problematic for visceral fat. So you really want to sprint and you want to cut out carbohydrates and eat more of a meat-centric diet, more meat and healthy fat to eliminate visceral fat and avoid carbohydrates. So the goal isn't to lose weight. The goal is to lose disease. And the only way, the best way that you can know whether you're losing disease is to do that MRI. And you want to see that you're losing dangerous inflammatory visceral fat and not your beneficial subcutaneous fat. So you want a thin layer. I'll show you an example. Hopefully I got a picture here. A thin layer of um, a good example. Well, actually, a good example of that thin layer is this right here. So this skin has a thin layer of subcutaneous fat. You want to have that kind of a thin layer and very little visceral fat. And so this is through a low carbohydrate diet and maximum intensity exercise. So brief, very intense exercise done infrequently is what you want to do. Some other helpful things to do is a sauna, like a dry finish sauna, cold showers, being outdoors in the sunshine, walking, and fasting, extended fasting. Visceral fat is eliminated by all those things. And visceral fat is accumulated or increased by frequent eating. So if you do a lot of frequent eating, which a lot of vegans, vegetarians do, they're constantly eating, that can make it really difficult to get rid of visceral fat. Not impossible. I'm working with vegans who are eliminating their visceral fat through strategies working with me, getting scans and seeing it, and they're improving. So it is possible to do it. But the more sensible approach is eating meat-based meals and in doing extended fasting where you fast for extended period of times, very ancestry aligned with how our ancestors lived for, hundreds of thousands of years, hunting woolly mammoths, having a lot of meat to eat when they got a woolly mammoth, and then going for long periods of time without any food. And it's that kind of a cycle of feasting and fasting
Right.
that really is so beneficial. That also helps to eliminate visceral fat. So I have all my clients doing extended fasting and then eating meat. And the other strategy I give them to eat is ferments. So eating fermented foods like Korean kimchi, fermented sauerkraut. I think there's a fermented dairy in India, maybe called dal or something like that. It's like fermented milk.
Right.
So yeah, so eating small amounts, not large amounts of it, for the microbial benefit. So I have my clients eating fermented foods for the bacteria that's present in it, not for its nutritional value. And so you think of it as a garnish on your meat when you're eating it, so that those beneficial microbes contribute to your microbiome in your gut. And immediately in the digestive process, even in your mouth, chewing the meat with the dal, the sauerkraut, the kimchi, fermented carrots, even organic apple cider vinegar, which is traditionally been used on a lot of salads. You should put it in with your in a little bit of water and drink it with your meat, and it's very beneficial.
Understood. These are some really great insights, and it's not doesn't seem to be as complicated as one would think when you're trying to understand visceral fat and working on eliminating it. So that really eases us down for us. And just a question over here is about fasting. When you say extended fasts, and say someone is probably not an athlete, they're not been very active in their life, and now they've done these scans, they have come across what the reality of their health is right now. They're working on it. What would be the right approach to fasting? Like, what are you saying? What are the hours of fasting that you're talking about, and how frequently should we do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what's interesting, if you think about ancestrally how we would have lived, fasting would have been variable. So it would have been established based on how frequently were able to catch an animal. And so it wasn't like every 3 days we caught an animal. It was probably like maybe 7 days. Another time it'd be 14 days. Another time it'd be 21 days. Another time it might be 2 days. So when it comes to fasting, I recommend my clients mix it up and have variability. But generally, to get them started, I have them head towards a slow progression of fasting over, say, 3 to 6 months. They slowly work their way up to doing a 3 to 4 day fast in about 6 months. So that's a slow enough progress that they're not overwhelmed with trying to do a 3 or 4 day fast initially. Because if you try to do that up front without some sort of experience or adaptation to fasting, you're going to be very weak and tired. and likely discouraged. So a good way to do it is simply don't eat after dinner. If you eat at dinner, don't snack after dinner, and then you get up in the morning and you've had a bit of a fast at nighttime that you've added usually 3 or 4 hours of extra fasting to because you purpose not to eat at nighttime. It can be hard, but when you get up in the morning, you eat your breakfast, and instead of 8 hours of fasting, you've extended that to 12 hours. And then gradually, what you can do is eat a later and later breakfast. So instead of eating breakfast maybe at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, you might eat your breakfast at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and then just gradually make it later and later to the point that you're eating a late breakfast, maybe an early lunch, like 10 or 11 o'clock. And eventually, as you keep progressing that to longer periods of time, you're skipping breakfast altogether and not eating after dinner, and you're simply eating your first meal the next day is lunchtime. And eventually, you do the same thing with lunch, and you're eating lunch later and later till pretty soon you're eating an early dinner, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and now you've extended your fast almost 24 hours. And so you just slowly build on fasting until you become more comfortable doing it. And what's beneficial about fasting, why it's so good, it's not just that you burn fat, which you do because your body needs energy. And so the proper way to think about fat is it's an energy reserve. So you have this fat that's accumulated around your body that you can exploit and leverage to burn and get energy from. But as good as that is, the real benefit to fasting, in my opinion, comes from autophagy. And autophagy is this process where cells clean themselves up from debris and garbage. You can think of it as housekeeping. So just as part of life, or just living, we will accumulate debris and disease and error and problems inside our cells. And when we're fasting, autophagy is the process where those things get corrected. They get cleaned up. And so sometimes literally for the first time in people's lives, they're correcting those problems and cleaning out the house, so to speak. And so autophagy oftentimes is a novel concept, something that people have never experienced and encountered before physiologically, because it's not unusual to find somebody that's never fasted before. And so the first time they fast, it can have a profound effect. So as you do it more and more, you get more and more benefit, and you get more correction of disease. And people find that their joints improve. Their bursitis, tendonitis, inflammatory conditions improve. Skin conditions improve. And heart disease improves. Kidney disease improves. Liver disease. In all the different forms of chronic disease that we studied in 6,000 people, eliminating that visceral fat improved it. But when we also followed them for fasting, it was accelerated. It really picked up the elimination of visceral fat and the reversal of disease. So I like to say this: when you fast, it creates my superpowers. It really allows me to do new things. One of the big changes that I noticed in 3 years of fasting for 3 days a week is that my balance got really good. And so there's a test, and I'll try to do it here, test where I stand with one foot with my eyes closed, and I become, try it again. And I can stand quite still with that. So you want to try to stand on one foot with your eyes closed, and your balance, your ability to stand still, is predicated on your neurologics. And before I fasted, I was really wobbly. I would be all over. And you can try that if you're watching this show today. And as you age, your central nervous system deteriorates. But when you start fasting, it repairs that central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system, so your balance improves significantly. So that was a profound difference that I noticed anecdotally as I started to do fasting. So try the one-legged balance test with your eyes closed, and over a period of time, as you fast, you'll get a lot better at doing at your balance when you start fasting for extended periods of time.
Understood. That's really interesting. That's something I'm hearing for the first time. And talking about fasting, I mean, it's one of the most, easily available, cheapest things that we can begin today. It doesn't cost anything. And with the right training and the right progression, I'm sure that it can be quite beneficial for us, right? So thank you for sharing that with us. And moving on to, men's health specifically, and talking about visceral fat, because women have more or less been more vigilant about restoring health and repairing health in some or the other way almost throughout their whole lives. They are in this constant, at least a cycle. Probably some of them are progressing, some of them are not, but they are still working out. They are trying to take better health, care of their health, right? And I'm not generalizing, but I'm sure there are many others, many men out there who are doing a great job for their health as well. But for me, like, see, my father or my friends' fathers, because their finances or work, all of these things just become so much more important in their early years of careers, that they just don't seem to put so much importance on their health and well-being. And what we say, the dad bod, right, it just becomes a joke, like a very casual joke for everybody, for every father, every friends and family that you see to have that kind of a physique, right? And most of them just consider it to be, like, you're just like visually healthy, or you're just visually fat. It's not aesthetic enough. But what would you say, like, what would be the wake up call that you can give them today, that they should definitely start working on it right now, and what effects it might have later on in their life, when they're 70 or 80, that they haven't even thought about?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Good question, and I think people in India and people in America all over the globe get accustomed to seeing people that are obese, and we become familiar with it, and we start tolerating it. But it's a disease, and you have to really understand it. So this series, more than probably any other series of MRIs, helps, I think, to illustrate that point. So this is the 68-year-old business executive who owned a company, and he has a large amount of visceral fat within his abdomen. He's got a dad bod. He's just a fat guy. And in his muscles, he also has that fat deposit within his muscles. And this is week 0. And, and from here to here is just 2 weeks. But already, if you're watching, you can see that he got better. He reduced his visceral fat. And all he did in that 2 weeks was he simply cut out processed carbohydrates. So no bread, no rice, no pasta, no noodles. He just ate meat and vegetables. And it had that profound effect in just 2 weeks. But look at his change over 34 weeks. This was actually 35 weeks. Dramatic reduction in his visceral fat. His muscles are now completely clean of that fat. He no longer has fat in his muscles. He's got a 6-pack now, and he looks like he's got the shape of a 20-year-old collegiate athlete. And so this is what happens when you lose visceral fat. Your shape improves, and your muscles improve performance-wise. Like I mean, I don't always show my shirt up, but I'm a 60-year-old guy, and I have an abdomen more with very little exercise, more like a 20-year-old. And so focusing in on that visceral fat really allows your body's shape and how your muscles hold on to your skeleton in a much more healthy manner. So this guy goes from a dad bod to this just by cutting out processed foods, and he did not exercise 1 minute. So the importance of this study, this example, is to challenge people with the awareness that how important what you eat is when it comes to your health is through your diet, and you cannot exercise yourself into a state of good health if you're eating poorly, eating bad food. Carbohydrates, especially processed carbohydrates, are the biggest problem when it comes to health, in my opinion. It's not a lack of exercise. If you were to do one thing or the other, I'd rather people never exercise as long as they eat healthy rather than trying to exercise and eat lousy food. In the end, it's the healthy eating person that lives a normal life, a better life. So I think this is a good example. Hopefully that helps.
Absolutely, it does. And that's true. Like when we start working out, as a newbie, as a beginner, we find like it's easy to, bargain with ourselves. I've started working out. I've burned these calories today. I can allow myself to have this extra cookie or to have this, sandwich. And that happens when we begin with it, right? So that makes so much sense. Thank you for sharing this with us. And since you mentioned this, I was really willing to ask this about you because you're a 60-year-old guy and you don't look 60 at all, and the amount of energy that you have at this age, the kind of things that you're doing, watching you sprint at 60, what does a typical day or a week in your life look like? What are the things that have stuck through your routine and, your like regime, your fitness regime that has really worked for you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do probably about 4 to 5, maybe 6 times a week is that I sprint, and sprinting is really my favorite form of exercise that I most like to do, and so I will work out in a very intense manner for a short period of time. But most of my emphasis is on my diet, eating good, healthy meat, eating fermented foods with it. I don't eat vegetables. I'm a little bit unusual. I don't eat vegetables unless they've been fermented, and I don't eat fruit unless they've been fermented to get rid of the carbohydrates. And also, some plants, a lot of plants, in fact, have what are increasingly being called defense mechanisms inside of them, these microtoxins and anti-nutrients that are problematic to try to keep the seeds intact, and they can be very problematic over a period of time. So I eat just fermented vegetables, fermented fruit, and meat, and then I fast 3 days every single week, sometimes 4 days. I get a lot of sleep, a lot of sunshine. I'm outdoors a long time. I do a sauna for 30 minutes every single day for 30 minutes. And I do cold showers or cold plunges in lakes. And those kind of make up my day. But, I'll point out that the change, I have a picture of my face when I first got started. This is me at the age of 48. And that was before, with this when I had a lot of visceral fat inside of me. And I became aware at that photograph about visceral fat. And I started changing my life by eliminating visceral fat, eliminating carbohydrates, and eating clean and sprinting. I started sprinting right here. And you can see the profound change. I don't even look like the same person. It changes that much. But literally, that's what happens. So if you're listening to my voice today, and especially you're a female, I want you to take out the photographs of your ancestors. And I want you to look at your female ancestors in particularly and watch what happens to them when they hit menopause. They usually have pretty nice feminine faces, but then once they hit menopause, they really start becoming less healthy looking. And the reality is, we don't like to say it is, they're less attractive. And the reason is, as you lose your health, you lose your attraction. We don't want to spend time around people that aren't healthy because they may have disease and they may not be able to help us. We're attracted to people who are healthy because they're going to potentially have knowledge that's going to be beneficial for us on how to live better. There is a biological drive in us to be attracted to people that look healthy and to avoid people that don't look healthy. So if you're running a business, you're an influencer, you have to work with people. You want to be as healthy as possible so that people will pay more attention to you and you'll have an easier time influencing them, whatever it is that you're trying to do. We're all influencers. If we influence our spouses, we influence our children, we influence our parents, we influence our colleagues, we influence clients, whoever we might be selling to. So a biological advantage that's available to everybody that almost nobody takes advantage of is their health. And so whatever you do, whatever kind of a job you have, whatever you do to earn a living, you will do it better if you get yourself healthy, and not just a little bit healthy, but optimally healthy. So that's why I'm a health and performance optimizing physician. I optimize people's health. I don't just get them to lose a little bit of weight. I get them to lose a lot of disease, optimizing their health. And then they look way better, they perform way better, and then their quality of their lives substantially improves. So I think photographs are good to take, track things over a period of time, and you can see the influence that visceral fat plays in your health, and why you want to get rid of visceral fat from within your abdomen, and start living the life that you're supposed to live.
Absolutely. This makes so much sense. And it's just amazing looking at these two pictures and looking at you right now talking to us. I mean, you're just leading by example, and there's nothing better than looking at you and your work currently, right? So thank you so much for sharing this and, giving this vision to our audience, and, so that they can visualize better for themselves when they would be 60 and 70, and what they would like to expect from their health at that point, right? So thank you for sharing that. And lastly, without taking too much of your time, to talk about when you say, health optimization by corporates, what do you mean by that, and how can we sort of, begin with that? Because in India, at least in the most typical corporate setting, there's still that hustle culture, there's still that overworking, working extra hours, and letting go of your leaves to just put in that extra work and not taking care of your health. That is still there, and a lot of companies still promote that, which is really bad even for the younger generation. Like, I see my friends who just got into like corporate jobs, right, and they still have that similar lifestyle that has been going on for decades before. So how do you think can we begin with, as a community, as corporates, or as business leaders, address this, and what are some simple things that we can start doing?
Yeah, so I think it's. I'll pull up this picture of these two faces that I think are interesting, and I will ask you. This is the same individual, but they look so different, don't they? How long of a period of time do you think it was between these photographs that this was taken?
I'd say yours.
Yeah, so the answer is only 3 months. And what happened was this guy here, earlier that week when that photograph was taken, had 2 heart attacks, full cardiac arrest, got CPR, and basically died twice and was brought back to life. And so, because of that, he changed his job. He was in a job that he hated because of all the stress. He was working many, many hours. And he left that job and started doing this, what he loved to do, which is he created leather work, and he created costumes he ended up taking a job doing leather work for movie characters. When he was all stressed out here, he was doing film editing, and he hated it, and it was long hours. So I say to business leaders, you do not want to stress out your employees. If you stress them out, this guy is not nearly as good of an employee as this guy is. And so this guy was filled with visceral fat and disease, and it couldn't be as productive as this guy is. So helping business leaders to understand that if they can get their employees more healthy by eliminating stress, eliminating bad food in their diets, educating employees that their body is their most important physical asset. And when it comes to a corporation's most important physical assets are its employees. And business leaders need to make those decisions for those companies on the basis of what can we do to take care of our most important assets. It's not your equipment, it's not your bank accounts, it's your people. The people are the ones who are going to make you the revenue and take care of them. So I like to start with leadership at the top of companies, getting them healthy themselves optimally, letting them become the face of health to inspire the employees to make necessary decisions. So you need to, if you're a business leader and you're listening today, you need to model that health first and foremostly so you can live a better life yourself, but also you can be an influencer to your company and then allow it to trickle down. I work with quite a few people from India, remotely, internationally, and people fly in all over the world to come see me as well. Yeah, the leadership in India should really be focusing on helping their employees through good, effective corporate wellness programs where employees can learn about the proper way of eating, learn about visceral fat, learning about sprinting, promoting. You can have sprinting in your company for short periods of time. It just takes a few minutes to do it, and they don't have to go to a gym for a half hour. You can just do one or two sprints in 1 or 2 minutes, and you'd have incredible improvement in your employees just from sprinting a little bit at a time. So I like to work with corporate leadership to put in health programs in companies and organizations to get their employees more healthy, and it just picks up morale, improves productivity, helps the company be more successful at its mission.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us. It was really informative, and especially this last bit. I hope that, corporate leaders do pick this up and do, create this healthy environment for the employees, because in the end, it's going to help both the companies, the company and the employees and the productivity, right? So this makes so much sense. Thank you for sharing this with us. And this brings us to the end of the podcast today. As we conclude, do you have any last messages or thoughts to leave us with?
Yeah, I would leave people with this thought that they need to have a necessary mindset by appreciating their body. If they see their body as their most important physical asset, the most important thing that you can touch or point a stick at is not your bank account, it's not your house, it's not your car or your yacht or all the money you own, it's your body. And the reality is because all those other things do not have as much influence on how much you're going to enjoy every circumstance in your life from this point on, in the future and onward, whether you're going to enjoy them or suffer them. And I'll leave you with this thought: a healthy man has many dreams, an unhealthy man only one. And so once you lose your health, all the money you have can't get it back. You're used to all the money you have solving all your problems, but the one it will never solve is health. And so health has to be acquired not through wealth, but by desire. And it starts with appreciating that your body, not your money, is your most important physical asset. Start living that way, and you'll start living better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Sean. That was a lovely message. And I hope this episode reaches a lot of our audience and that they're really encouraged to learn more about what you teach and learn more from you, and probably even collaborate or work with you in the future. And we would love to see your work coming to India and probably hosting you here in India sometime in the future. That would be really amazing. Thank you so
Yeah.
much once again for being here and doing this today.
Yeah, well, if anybody is interested in following more, I'm on Instagram, X, and YouTube, just on DRSEANOMARA. And my website, if you're interested in working with me, is just www.drseanomara.com.
Absolutely. And they'll find the details in the description below. All the links would be there so they can easily reach out to you through any way that they want to. So thank you so much once again for doing this. That's it for today's episode. I am Sakshi Pawar and I'll be your host for the Settle or Be Better podcast. So stay tuned while we bring more inspiring stories. You know the drill. Subscribe to the Settle or Be Better podcast. Like, share, and comment on our videos. And oh, hit the bell icon because you don't want to miss the the mind boggling health discussions we're about to bring for you. Why settle when you can be better?